Welcome, everybody, to the May 21st, 2026 Energy Working Group for New Hampshire Network for Energy, Environment, and Climate. Today, we have two main items or agenda items. One, we're going to have a talk about supply, demand, and the price of electricity by Paul Fiondella. And then later in the meeting, we are going to have a discussion with Paul Bemis where he would like to propose some ideas. So take it away.
Hey, my name is Paul Fiondella. I live in Stoddard. I've done some research on the impact of artificial intelligence data centers on energy supply and how it's going to affect New Hampshire. We're going to go briefly through a series of slides here. The first slide basically shows you, if you look at the number 8373, just put a 0 in front of the 8 and move the decimal point. And what you're looking at is 8.3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's the price of energy delivered to the grid by suppliers in the New England area. The second number there is 26086. That's the peak demand in June 24th of 2025. These are 2025 figures in megawatts. And the 30 in the next, where it says installed nameplate, that's the actual capacity of the New England grid. So it's 30,000 megawatts worth of power, or you can simply get rid of the zeros and call it 30 gigawatts. So New England has the potential for delivering 30 gigawatts of power at any one time. The last number there, the 1110, is what happens when you get to the peak period of delivery, where there's no more room in terms of the demand over there, the 26086, and the installed capacity of 30. There's a buffer in there, which has to be protected. And when you start to encroach on that buffer, then you start to pay more per kilowatt hour. So that's where where large costs come into the picture from peak demand. I'm going to skip over to slide number 3. What you see here is something very interesting. The actual price, the peak price, is driven by fuel demand. So it's not that everybody's using a lot of energy and so the price goes up. It's that the actual price of the components of energy go up. And you can see here, January, February, and December, they're paying 13 cents or so, 13 and a half cents per kilowatt hour for delivery into the system. And that's because there's competition between producing electrical energy and producing heat coming from natural gas. And that demand for natural gas drives up the price of natural gas. So when you're told, all we have to do is add a few gas-fired generators, everything will be wonderful, this is what you're looking at in terms of what you're going to end up paying. You're going to pay a lot more for energy where there's competition for that type of energy than otherwise. The other figures you can see go as low as 3.5 cents a kilowatt hour in April. That's what it's costing wholesale prices coming into the grid. Looking down here at slide 5, it's just another representation of the same thing. The red dots in the center are February, December, and January. That's when the price is spiking in the winter months. We're going to go farther down here to 7. Now, this shows you what happens when supply gets tight. And that's occurred in the summer with air conditioning. And you can see what happens to the price at a moment of peak demand. This is when you have to pay a penalty for exceeding the limits of energy use that are built into the system. And you start to go into the buffer zone. And so there's a higher price that's going to be paid at that point. Second problem you have here is that if you exceed the ability of the system to deliver the energy, then you have blackouts. So you can see that we had one day last year when that almost happened. And that is a function of temperature. So as we get more and more global warming, we're going to have higher and higher summer temperatures. And depending on what we do about the energy supply, this is what's going to happen to the price. Let me go down here to 10. This shows, which is really the point of this presentation, of what's going to happen as a result of data centers that are going to come on the scene in the next few years, that are going to be created because of artificial intelligence. What we have here is 3 different levels of artificial intelligence data centers. The one that's going to be ubiquitous is like, the 25 megawatt AI plants. These are plants which will, a business like an insurance company will probably have a plant like this so that it can access its data with artificial intelligence algorithms. The 200 megawatt is basically what you would get from somebody who wanted to do Bitcoin mining, where they want to run the plant all the time at the highest possible level in order to produce Bitcoins. The 1.6 gigawatt, that is the type of plant which is being built today all over the United States to do the basic workload of artificial intelligence, which is developing models. And these are the type of energy loads that you're going to see in New England. And what you can see here is that any one of them puts you into the reserve area. So that means add a 25 megawatt plant, and now at that summer peak, you're now in the zone where you're being constantly penalized because you're going into your reserve. The 1.6 gigawatt plant, you're not only going to go into the reserve, you're going to start to exceed the capacity of the grid to produce energy. This is just from one plant, okay? And there's probably going to be a lot more than one plant. In fact, I would contend that almost every data center that exists today is going to be replaced by an AI-driven data center in the future. And that is going to result in a huge demand for energy. It is the major factor in building AI plants today, and they're going to be all over the place, and they're going to replace what exists now. So you might want to know, well, why is it that that's happening? We'll show just one more of these slides and then move into that question. Well, this is the problem. A 1.6 gigawatt plant is equal to 10.9% of New England's entire annual energy demand. Just one plant. So if one plant ends up anywhere in New England, it's going to use almost 11% of all the energy currently being produced in New England. And you have to ask yourself, does the energy plan for the state of New Hampshire consider the impact of these data centers on energy supply? To which I would respond, no. They're not thinking about it. In fact, they're trying very hard not to think about it because it's a big problem. And I want to just go into why AI is inevitable, because, a lot of people feel, well, if we can only prohibit, just let's say no to data centers, let's not have them built. And that's really going to be an impossibility, because what they're doing with these AI data centers is they're replacing the way that you interact with the computer. Once upon a time, people used to type commands into the computer to get it to do things. Then starting with Apple and Microsoft Windows, you had a point and click interface where, you'd click on the program and you type some things in, click on another program. but that's your visual interface. That's being replaced by a natural language interface. And the amount of computation that's required to convert human fluent speech into action by the computer is like quantitatively enormous. The the words have to be broken down into tokens. They have to be run through all sorts of mathematical algorithms. So the computational intensity is quite high. And you can basically, look in the paper that I put up there. It'll tell you how much computation is being done comparatively between the two different methods. And basically, the processing of this mathematical computation, just looking at a typical Google search versus an AI search, a typical AI query, it's roughly 10 times more energy than the standard Google search. So that's a very simple thing. So for example, if you had a friend named Bob and you knew where he lived, and you were to ask AI to give you his age, okay, it would take 10 times the energy of just looking in a town record, in a town voting record to find the same information. And that's what you're faced with in terms of the impact. To try to reverse this is impossible. It's just not going to happen. And part of the reason is because we've been working with computers with structured data. You can think of it this way: name, address, telephone number, goes into a database. Each one of those components has a field, your name, your age, your date of birth. It's a field, and it's all structured data. So we know exactly, all the components. But somebody had to put all that data in there. And that data can be accessed fairly quickly. All I got to do is say Fiondella. It's going to find all the Fiondellas in the file. And then maybe where I live, the first letters of where I live, it's going to find me. So that's a fairly simple search. The same thing with unstructured data. And this is what AI does. It works with unstructured data. If you ask this question from an AI process program, it will go and look at everything it can find out there. You tell it the name of the person and maybe the first part of the address, and it will actually find that person's age by looking out on the internet at anywhere where that person is mentioned, where those two things might happen, and then it figures out how to derive age from what it finds. So when I did this with somebody that I knew, it found the fellow's the year that he graduated from college in the United Kingdom, and it computed what his age would be from what it believed to be the age at which he would have graduated at. So it was semi-accurate within about a year. And that's the kind of thing that AI does. So it does a lot more computation to arrive at that conclusion. So we know that the impact in terms of computation means more processors. So this can be tens of thousands of processors, huge plants, enormous amounts of energy. So we have to ask ourselves, well, why would they come here? I mean, some people don't think they're going to come to New England, but then you have to take a look at what is it that we have in New England that maybe they don't have in Kansas. And one of the things we have in New England is we have an awful lot of intellectual institutions like MIT, like Dartmouth, like our university systems. And we have a lot of companies that do research. And it turns out that the Boston area is a hotbed of pharmaceutical research. And one of the things that you can do with AI is you can do a lot of pattern matching. And so this enables these companies to look for new drugs and to do all kinds of simulations. Instead of having to go out there and do experiments, they can do simulations and test the results of the simulations with their experiments. So essentially, it's going to be a component of the economy here. So if we don't get the data centers and they all go to Texas, then you can expect all of this intellectual might to go to Texas with it. And we'll end up like a colony of Texas. I don't know, we'll produce maple syrup, but not much else. So you have to assume that the way things will work, if we're going to be economically relevant as a section of the country, is we are going to have to find a way to maintain our advantage, our intellectual advantage, our intellectual property advantage by basically using these technologies. And if you go to MIT, and I've been there for 1 or 2 sessions of research, and they're all involved in this stuff. I mean, they're just like up to their eyeballs in AI, in every possible field you can imagine. So it may seem strange to people who are like older, but I think you'll find that in about 3 years, it'll be like the cell phone. We didn't use it maybe 30 years ago. Now you can't live without it. AI is going to take over just about everything, and everybody will know how to use it. Children will grow up with it. You even have the possibility in maybe 20 to 30 years where children will have robot companions when they grow up to help them. So I don't think you can just turn your back on it. But now we have the problem. You see from this slide that you build a couple of these centers, and all of a sudden, where's the energy going to come from? And this, I think, is where the problem is in the state of New Hampshire, because basically, we don't have the energy. We built our energy system here around wind power. That was the replacement for nuclear power plants that were becoming obsolete. And the administration in Washington has killed wind power. I mean, it literally has been buying up the leases from wind farms off the coast so that they won't be built. So looking at the options, let's start with gas, natural gas. Well, you saw what happens in the winter with natural gas. You compete with heating use. But in addition to that, they're now taking turbine orders for electrical generators that use natural gas for 2031. So 5 years from now is when you can get a hold of a gas turbine. Get in line. And that information came out in the last quarterly report from General Electric, the division of General Electric that builds these turbines. So they're not available. You won't see them, get in line. Okay, well, how about small nuclear reactors? This is what the governor talks about all the time. Well, there's about 130 different companies that are involved in trying to build small nuclear reactors. The problem is they're all in the experimental phase. The technologies are unproven, and there isn't any commercial small nuclear reactor in use in the United States. There are a few in Canada. They use old technology. They have the same problems as boiling water reactors do. They produce waste, so on and so forth. So let's assume that somehow all of the problems with these small nuclear reactors are solved. Well, you can ask the Wall Street people about this. I saw an interview the other day on CNBC, and they don't expect to see anything before the earliest 2032. Other people say try 2037. Okay, so what's that? That's 10, 15 years from now, 12, 15. Okay, forget it. You're not going to be solving the energy problem of data centers with that. Okay, big nuclear plants. Let's build another Seabrook. That's at least 10 to 15 years. Okay. And remember, you have two parts to this problem. One is getting the regulatory approval. The second is building them. And with big nuclear plants, Seabrook went broke because there were cost overruns. These big plants are very complicated, very expensive, and they they run into financial problems. That's why we haven't had a lot of them built over the last 20 years or so. So big nukes aren't going to solve the problem. Wind actually takes about 3 years to get an approval and then only about 3 years to build. And these wind plants have been producing as much power as nuclear power plants have. So they were a really good idea. That's where ISO New England placed all of its chips. And that's where everybody in New England figured, okay, we're going to have wind farms. That'll take care of our problems. But guess what? The federal government just killed it. They have thrown every possible obstacle in the way of building new plants. So you can't get a license to build an offshore wind plant. It isn't going to happen. And then it takes 3 years after that. So the soonest you'll start to see more wind plants, other than the ones that they've delayed the completion of, would be maybe 5 years from now, after the current administration is no longer in Washington, assuming the next administration reverses what the current administration has done. So wind isn't going to do it. And by the way, the major builder of the wind plants, Ørsted, which was a Danish company, they nearly went broke when the current administration started to, try to shut them down. And they had to raise something like $9 billion in order to prevent themselves from going broke. They pulled out of the American market. And all the other European builders of wind plants have been basically saying this is not a place where the regulatory environment is friendly enough for us to want to do more business. So we got a lot of problems with bringing back wind here. And it certainly isn't going to solve the data center problems. So what does that leave? That leaves us with solar farms. That's what it leaves us with. So between us and a real problem with the supply of energy in New England is whether we can start to build solar plants. So what's the advantage to solar plants? Well, the approval process is about 2 years. At least that was the plant in Warner that I looked at. They still haven't gotten all their approvals. Eversource is slowing them down. But basically, a couple of years of approvals, which could be simplified if the state passed appropriate regulations. And then these plants can get up in 6 months. Now, these are not 1.6 gigawatt plants. They're 5 megawatt plants. But the difference is they're low cost, they can be built faster, and they actually can produce the energy at 10 cents a kilowatt hour. And that means they can be built cheaply, fast, locally. And you living in your own community, if you had a 5 megawatt solar plant, would be protected against what is going to happen when one of these big AI data centers comes into the picture anywhere in New England. Because we know when it comes here, it will raise everybody's rates. That's already happened in every state in which they've gone into. In I think in Northern Virginia, you were looking at maybe a doubling of your rates. So microgrids is possibly the way for us to start to get the regulatory system to think about building more plants like the Warner plant. The Warner plant is a 5 megawatt plant, and it connects into the grid using the local power lines. They don't need to have a special interconnection to the grid. And they can supply that type of power at the construction cost of about $2 a watt. So the whole plant costs $10 million. So this is not an expensive way to deliver energy anymore. The difference between that plant and a microgrid is the protection that a microgrid can provide the community. A microgrid would be a plant like that plant that could be operated independent of the external grid. It could stand on its own like an island in an emergency. That would mean if you get a summer peak, let's say we have more and more of these summer peaks because of global warming, and you have a microgrid, you can still have your essential services, even if the entire grid goes down, because you can be separated from that grid. The second feature of a microgrid is the one that's most important to everybody else. And that is that if you have a battery backup to your microgrid, then that battery storage can be used to prevent the system from going down. And actually, what happened last June was that they got about, I think it was 4 megawatts worth of power out of local battery storage, people's homes, places, like that had actually put the battery backup units in with the solar units. They got enough so that they only were fluctuating into that reserve for 5-minute intervals rather than being there for the whole length of the heat event. So if you have enough of these microgrids with enough battery backup, you actually provide a buffer for the entire New England grid. So that's the basic thrust of why microgrids have a future in New Hampshire. We could do this if we wanted to do it. There has been legislation passed. I don't know exactly where it's sitting, whether the governor is going to sign it, to do a microgrid in New Hampshire. Because keep in mind, the interplay is between companies like Eversource and the people who developed the solar array, like in Warner, and the connection, all the steps, the regulatory steps, all the requirements that Eversource has to have on a microgrid have to be ironed out so that they're routine. Because you simply don't want people in a community in New Hampshire say, okay, we want to build a solar array, we want to build a solar farm, we want to build a 5-megawatt farm, we want to have battery backup, and then we want to connect up to the grid. And the grid says, Eversource says, sorry, you got to do this, you got to do that, and you got to do 15 million other things, and time, so time is money, and you're delayed and you're delayed and you're delayed. You want to smooth that process out. So we need an experimental microgrid based on solar arrays that would serve as a model that could then be adopted by other communities in New Hampshire. And we need an energy plan that says solar farms within the grid on a community basis are the potential future for energy supply in New Hampshire. So that's basically the thrust of my talk. I would say to you that if you look at the paper that I wrote last December, I put on at the end of it a series of things that could be done. And I think Paul is going to talk more about what an actual experience of trying to get some things done here in New Hampshire. But I'll just review this briefly. You can really ask the politicians, when they come knocking at your door in a few months, you can say that, we want the energy department to build a microgrid power plant with solar energy as the basis of energy supply. 2, we want to identify and remove regulatory and legislative obstacles to the use of solar for this pilot microgrid. And you might actually say all of the regulations in the state that have been developed by a lot of crazy legislators to prevent solar energy from developing in the state. And we want to shift consumer level funding of solar rebates, should they be reestablished, from just solar collectors on the home, which are very expensive and most people can't afford them, to battery backup, because battery backup is really the source of benefit from one community to another. You have one community that's got the battery systems, another community that doesn't. You have an energy shortage. You can borrow the energy if it's properly installed. So you want to encourage people to have battery backups instead of diesel generators to keep their homes. The other things are when these data center plants appear, you want to make sure that they use solar instead of diesel and natural gas for their own backup systems, because all of these AI plants, they run 24 hours full bore. That's all they do. They just use energy 24 hours at a constant rate. They run very hot. They have to be cooled, and they use up enormous amounts of energy. They can't go down. So if there's a fluctuation in the grid and they have to somehow supply their own energy, they turn on diesel, a bunch of diesel plants to supply the extra energy. Well, when they go in somewhere, they should be required to do their peak and backup systems with solar. That's something which they can do. They know how to do. It's just something you have to demand that they do. Otherwise, they'll just build the diesel generators, which of course create, all kinds of pollution. So that's about all I can say about this subject. And I'll leave it to Paul to continue, and you can ask questions later.
Before we move on to Paul, other Paul Bemis. So this work group, right, is mainly made up of people who work on town energy committees. So what role, if any, do you see town energy committees playing in getting any microgrids?
I think the role is this. You have to understand that the solution to your energy supply problems in the future, and they're going to materialize very soon, is you have to start thinking about community level solar farms. It's far more efficient to have a 5 megawatt solar farm in your town than it is to try to get that number of people to put solar systems on their houses. So that would be step one. Understand what works best. And solar farms are going to work far better than individual home solar systems. Number two, you're going to have to start demanding of your legislators and the governor, whoever runs for governor office this fall, on both slates, that they pay attention to solar as a solution to energy supply. So I would say those are the two things that you need to think about doing, and you need to become educated as to the options here. If I was on a town energy committee and I was seriously interested in making an impact, I would go and visit that Warner plant and take a look at it. It's quite amazing to see how quickly they were able to build that plant and how cheaply they were able to do it. And it goes directly into the local grid, and it'll supply enormous amounts of energy for that community and do it at the cost of 10 cents a kilowatt hour. So you really have to think about this problem on that political level. I would say anytime I saw a politician, I would ask them, do you support solar energy, and what are you going to do about data centers coming into the state to make sure that I have I can turn my lights, my heat on, etc. And I think when they say to you, "Oh, we're going to solve the problem with small nuclear reactors," you have to be prepared to say that's bullshit. That's not a solution. That's pie in the sky baloney. And you have to be able to educate yourself to the point where you can argue with them on the facts. And the facts basically do say, as I went through them today, there are no other options. We are not going to get energy from any of these other sources in time to deal with the arrival of AI data centers. A lot of people think, like in Maine, we'll just prevent data centers from coming in. Won't work. It would be like saying you're going to preserve the horse and buggy when the automobile was coming in. These are huge macroeconomic forces. The economy depends upon growth. That's capitalism. And growth today is coming from these AI data centers. So
Okay.
that's what you need to do. You need to
All
get
right.
educated and then demand.
All right. Thank you. All right. So since we have about 20 minutes left, why don't we do this? If you've got questions for Paul F., let's let Paul Bemis do his thing, and then we'll save time for questions for both Pauls at the end. And also, Sarah, I was wondering if you, after Paul Bemis goes, Sarah, if you could take 2 minutes and give us an update on the status of the solar loans legislation. So let's move to Paul Bemis now.
All right, I don't have any slides prepared, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm the chair of the Bristol Energy Committee. I'm also an ASHRAE member. I'm also the person for Community Power Network of New Hampshire for my town. And I also am in the data center business. We do data center design optimization and have been doing it since 2008. So I own a software company that does computational fluid dynamics for heat dissipation in data centers. So I know a lot about data centers. I'm an electrical engineer and mechanical engineer. So that's who I am. Paul is right about this whole thing. Him and I agree violently on most of these issues. When they do say nuclear power, remember, particularly small modular, the argument finally at the end of it all is that it'll be cheaper because it's modular and can be produced in volume. Well, that's only true when you produce it in volume. And the fact that there's never been any produced means that the dollar per kilowatt hour isn't going to be cost effective forever, considering that solar, as Paul pointed out, is continuing to decline in cost and grow exponentially. So solar and wind are both, and battery, generally referred to as electrotech, is growing at such a fast rate that, and this is quite normal for an S-curve, technology S-curve, and something called Wright's law, that as things produce, if you produce more of it, the cost per unit drops. And that is happening with solar, and that is happening with wind. He's also right on microgrids and the need for us to build microgrids. Now, whether we use community solar or whether we use rooftop solar with battery, as Vermont has done and shown successfully that it will work, I'm in favor of them both. And he's quite right about solar. And we need to encourage our legislators, both current and prospective, to support solar. We do not support solar very vigorously in this state. We do not have any incentives for it. In fact, we tax it at the state level. Property taxes against solar. So the solar array on my house increases according to someone, increases the value of my home, and therefore I pay a property tax on it. Now, there is an exemption for that if you can get your town to pass it. But again, the Republicans this year tried to eliminate that altogether. So what can we do quickly? The town energy committees, of which this group represents, I think have a voice. And I think we should use that voice to apply pressure to our legislators and our utilities. One of the things I talked to Mary Beth about is starting a Eversourced consumer group to influence Eversource. Eversource is the largest producer in the state, and they're dragging their feet on everything, on permitting for the Warner plant, the solar plant, on interconnect, on interconnect fees. And in this month's, I know Cliff is with us on this, in this month's newsletter from Community Power, we learned that Unitel has come to the table. Unitel is talking about time varying rates. They're talking about sharing of data. They're talking about, a variety of things that would improve our situation.
Changing load settlement.
And load settlement. Most importantly, load settlement. Yet, and load settlement, by the way, is the way that you account for PV, right? The way you account for solar is that it subtracts from the requirement to be supplied by something else, but yet you have to account for it. The only people who have that data is Eversource, and they're not sharing it. So
well, it's not just the data. They won't account for exports to the grid from batteries or from solar or anything on the distribution grid as an offset to the wholesale load obligation.
That's right.
So in effect, they're the only ones that can be the off taker, such as through net metering.
Yes.
And it boxes out the development of a competitive market for distributed energy resources that communities all over the state could be developing if they could use it to supply their own community power programs or whatever.
Exactly
Doesn't
correct.
doesn't FERC 2222 prevent them from doing that if it's
No,
large
that
enough?
doesn't really help because what it says is instead of functioning like you do electrically, which is as a load reducer relative to the transmission grid and the wholesale market, because you basically offset load on the distribution grid within the state. With FERC 2222, it says you can pretend like you're generating power at the hub in Massachusetts and not get any credit for avoided transmission or capacity cost in the ISO New England market. So it's a way of minimizing the value of that because FERC now says if you're under 5 megawatts and you're on the distribution grid, you can function as a load reducer relative to transmission cost and relative to capacity cost. And when you add those credits to the avoided energy costs, including the line losses over the transmission grid, because you're offsetting on the distribution grid, that is what makes projects pencil, basically.
And Brad, what Eversource does, what they say, and I just heard it again this morning in the energy efficiency event, Brett, Sam Evans Brown was talking. What they say is, oh, for us to do any kind of time of use or any kind of that kind of work, we have to install smart meters. And that's a big investment. That's a big cost. And therefore, it's going to drive up rates. And the conservative legislators go, oh, can't do that. So this is how they do it. They simply stonewall it by saying it would cost money. Yet they're going to do this big power line improvement in the state of Maine.
Well, that they earn a rate of return on. So of course
that's right. Exactly correct. Exactly correct. Eversource is the problem in our state. Unfortunately, Community Power Coalition of New Hampshire, who's done a formidable job competing against this wave, is in a position where it's, they can't really beat them over the head. They have to cooperate with them, right? It's kind of a co-opetition kind of thing they have. So they're not in position to apply pressure. We are. We're the customers. We're the towns. We're the consumers. I think we have the opportunity to apply pressure to new legislators, get them on board with pressure, right? I'm already talking to a potential state senator that's going to run in my district and a potential Republican, rep, Democratic rep in this case, who's going to run. Pressure there, give them the tools they need to get the legislation in place to correct this thing. And at the same time, I think pressure them publicly. Peer pressure them. Unitil's doing it. I think the co-op's going to do it. Co-op's got some new people on board. They've got some new directors. I think they're going to be progressive. We got Eversource here being the laggard.
I can talk about the co-op at the end of this meeting.
Yes, I'd like you to talk about the co-op. I think that Eversource is going to be the laggard here, and I don't want to take it. I'm tired of this. I think consumers need to raise their voice here, and we are, this group, consumers. So that's my piece.
To make sure we cover everything, Sarah, you want to give your quick update? If you have any update to give?
Yeah, there's not much, but it is consistent. Every month I've been keeping you posted about CPACER legislation and also provision that many of you were supporting to extend the group net metering term for political subdivisions. So that would be our towns and our school districts and so on, to be a minimum of 20 years for large group net meter projects like the Warner project, which has many municipal off-takers. Both of those pieces of legislation, both the commercial property assessed clean energy and resiliency legislation that will allow a select board to authorize a community to participate in that program, and that provision about net metering for political subdivisions and that 20-year term are proceeding, and we're still in the messy middle of waiting to see what hits the governor's desk and what she does when she sees them on her desk. But they're moving forward, which is good.
Okay, thanks. And then Brad, I think you are new here. I'm going to give you a minute to introduce yourself, and then we can have at it with discussion.
Sure. So I am very new here, but sort of in a bunch of folks that I feel comfortable talking to. On the New Hampshire Electric Co-op front, there's 3 of us that are running on a slate to try to impact the policies that we've discussed ad infinitum here. And so I'm Brad Harkavy. I spent the last 15 years of my career building systems to sell to utilities. I was running a business that I sold to Oracle, and then I ran product for all of Oracle's utility products, stemming from things like distributed energy resource management systems and ADMS systems and um, customer engagement systems. We owned a company called Opower. We did a lot of behavioral programs, the customer billing systems. So I have a pretty broad purview into the utility business, and I would love to sort of use that to impact how we think about things on the board. I also personally have 2 electric vehicles, 12 heat pump heads, 4 compressors, solar on 2 houses, and 3 heat pump water heaters. So I kind of know what the opportunity space is, and based on the data that we've gotten from Clean Energy New Hampshire, the co-op is by far the laggard of much behind all of the IOUs as far as how we're thinking about clean energy. And that's a kind of dramatic shift over the last 10 years. I'm running with 2 other people, Tom Randall and Laurel Bovin, who are similarly minded, although very diverse politically. Like, so we have some independents, we have some Democrats, and then we have like Tom's a Democratic organizer. And certainly we've gotten a lot of flack from the current board, who's also up for re-election. So there's 3 seats. The chairman of the board has a slate of 2 other people that he's running with that will sort of continue what we're doing and have been doing for the last 5 years. And then there's us that are trying to change what's going on. I'll put a couple of links into the chat there. And I got to say, it was like super interesting talking to your folks, because many of the things you're saying are things that we'd like to work on. And I guess I did want to mention, like, I'm in agreement that community solar is pretty effective. There's some efficiencies from doing it at a bigger size, but I am kind of bullish on trying to get more storage into people's houses, because that benefits them from a resilience standpoint, reduces our peak, right? It's good stuff. Green Mountain Power has a great program, right, where they're subsidizing batteries in people's houses. I'd like to see us do stuff like that. And by the way, the co-op has much more latitude to whatever the hell they want to do, because they're not regulated by the PUC. So we can actually get programs going if we can change the complexion of the board. Was that a lot for 4 minutes?
No, that was good for 4 minutes. And Green Mountain Power is a great model. Green Mountain Power is a great model.
Yeah, let's start. Just one other thing I should mention is the board is going to the election is going to be won and lost by tens of votes. Like, if we get 3,000 people to vote for any of the directors, we're probably going to win. So if you folks are in the territory, if you have friends in the territory, if you have a ballot, or you can go vote online, please vote, because it matters significantly.
Mary Beth, let me just answer a question here. There was someone, I think it was Sherry, who put in a question here, requiring applicants who want to build large-scale facilities to fund efforts of predictable energy. Now, Paul spent some time talking about data centers here, and data centers are a big load, but data centers can also be your friend, because they are large capacity and they always have a large amount of storage. And data centers today are being built with a tremendous amount of storage, because they see the grid as unreliable themselves, and they need to be able to compensate for that, as well as for what we call transient situations in the data center that require startup of a diesel engine. They don't start immediately, so you need to carry the load during that period. Data centers can be cooperative in the environment. And what she points out is, in some areas, states are requiring data centers to buy heat pumps and batteries and solar for the community, so that the power that they need for the data center comes from the power that used to be sent to people's homes, but is now supplied by rooftop solar and battery. It's a win-win. They effectively offload the grid, so there's more power available for the data center. And this is the quickest, back to Paul's point, this is the quickest time to market for them, because solar battery is so much faster to deploy than anything else, including gas turbines or whatever else it is. So in some states, we see legislation being formed that says, Mr. Data Center, you want to build here, you have to make an investment in the community by building, microgrids are great, rooftop solar plus battery, whatever it happens to be, you have to make an investment in the community that there's power available for you. And then the data center becomes this partner in the community There are issues with water, by the way, and it's not a panacea. But if you want to have a commercial development in your environment, if you want to have industry in your environment, nothing is for free. It's all a compromise. And the compromise that some states are making is that if you want to participate in our state, you have to make an investment in storage and solar and renewable wind, whatever, microgrid in the community as a way to offset your footprint. So
I want to follow up on what Paul just said. Actually, this partnership with the large companies, the Googles, the Amazons, and so forth, it can be very productive because they have the capital, and solar is very competitive from an operational point of view. Obviously, the sun shines all the time. You don't have to buy natural gas. All the capital costs are up front. And then after that, the thing just produces energy for whatever. My units are going on more than 20 years, and they really haven't diminished that much in their terms of their production. So if you had a system in the state where you said to these data center companies, okay, you're going to, you're not going to be allowed to build to put diesel backup into your system. You're going to have to go solar. And by the way, you can go solar more easily simply by providing the capital to, the investment capital to this community and this community and that community that want to build these solar centers. And by the way, as the demands on the grid increase, and we have the possibility of the global warming causing more of these peak outage type situations, those communities actually are going to be protected because they're going to have the battery storage. They're going to have this solar to compensate for the demands on the grid. So it can really be a positive scenario. But in order for that positive scenario to occur, you have to have really a much better educated legislature and governor than we have now. Our politicians are way behind on solar. They don't get it yet. And what we can afford is what you can see on slide 11, which is in comes a unplanned data center. And I believe there was an article just yesterday about some fellow who has 100 acres, wants to build a big data center in New Hampshire. Now, he may not even get that far, but if somebody does, the impact is going to be tremendous. So we're going to go from being asleep, our political system being asleep, doing no preparation and no planning, to all of a sudden, gee, what happened? Oh, my goodness. And you certainly don't want a situation like this happening in the middle of winter. That's when people are really going to suffer if we start to have problems with the supply of energy in New England. So that's where it's at. We've got to get the political system to wake up. And I'm sorry to say a lot of people just seem to think that, okay, we'll try to change this law, we'll try to change that law. If you look at the laws in the legislature this year, they're almost all negative towards solar.
Yeah.
They keep killing these solar initiatives. So you really need to change the entire climate of opinion in the political system. And I hope it doesn't come as a result of a major supply crisis.
One other point.
I will say when I've been out canvassing and talking to people, data centers comes up frequently. And from my perspective, I do think it's kind of an opportunity, right? Like
it is an opportunity.
If I get elected to the board, we really don't have a say of whether that data center is going in or not going in, but we do have a great opportunity to figure out how we maximize the return on what they're doing to the grid, right?
And Brad, they have a need. They need your electricity.
Yep. Maybe unless they decide to generate all of their own, which
they can't, as Paul pointed out, they can't generate their own. They can't. They don't have the land to do it. They don't have the time to market. It's not going to be in their favor. They don't have the time. So they need your grid, and the opportunity for you to negotiate with them and say, you want my grid? How about you do a community solar here? How about you do a microgrid here? How about you do rooftop solar battery for all, like Vermont Power or Green Mountain Power? I mean, there's an opportunity here to negotiate with these
100%.
people. Yeah.
It's also strikes me as, we have the eighth highest cost of electricity in the country, so not an optimal place to stick a data center in general. Just going to lay that out there.
Yeah, it's true that it's not an optimal place, but the real value of these data centers, at least in the short term, is going to be that they're going to make computers more useful to subject matter experts. If you know something about biology, it's going to be a lot less difficult to get the computer to help you do your work. I mean, I prepared this slideshow in about, I think it took about 2 minutes with the use of AI. So, you got a lot of work to do. You're doing research. I mean, AI is very useful. So all of these intellectual skills, which we have a lot of in New England, which generate places like Silicon Valley, those startup companies are going to benefit from AI. That's the economic benefit here. And unless we're going to become a colony of Texas, and all we're going to do is produce some maple syrup occasionally, I mean, I really do think that, the people with brains in New England are going to demand data centers.
David, you had your hand up?
I just wanted to say that a recent development in Maine is that the Maine Efficiency Trust, whose job is to support, subsidize those who need it, heat pumps, electric vehicles, and so forth, has started a new program on small storage. And if someone dials into that program, they can be paid for any dispatch of their electricity from their local storage into the grid at times when the grid needs it. This has just started. It's just being announced. It's just being rolled out. And so it's something that I'm suggesting you keep your eye on. And I had a question of whether or not the Vermont program was continuing. I was told that it was defunded or had finished or stopped, but I could be wrong about that.
I heard they were going to move away from power walls to another battery supplier. I didn't know that the whole program had stopped.
No, my understanding is they went to the PUC and asked for more to be able to do more because it has been such a successful program that they're now doing more of it, including a BYO, bring your own BYOB. It used to be bottle of booze. Now it's battery, bring your own battery. So they're expanding the program to include heterogeneous batteries besides the Tesla Powerwall.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other thing here is that, let's say the governor, if we went back in the time machine, once upon a time, governors used to get on their planes and fly over to China and see if they could make some money over there with an American company building a plant or something. And maybe that would be a New Hampshire company, or maybe the Chinese would buy something from New Hampshire. Well, it certainly seems to me that there are battery manufacturers in China that wouldn't mind building a plant here in the United States. And their technology is so advanced at this point. I mean, I don't know if you've been looking at what Cattle has been doing over there, but they are just doing tremendous things with reducing the cost of batteries, making them really affordable. It's sort of like solar power on steroids over there with batteries. We had a political system that saw the advantage. The government flies over there and says to cattle, how do you like to build a plant near Portsmouth? And we can make batteries here in New Hampshire for our use. We have a market that's developing. We need low cost batteries. You have the technology. You can train our engineers to make them, our young people, give them jobs. Everybody's happy. So, there are possibilities in the political system for doing these sort of things. It would be nice if it was a priority.
So
yes, that's right.
I forget who has said, right, New Hampshire's behind compared to the rest of New England. And some of our utilities are not exactly pushing the envelope. And Paul and I discussed briefly yesterday, what could we do to kind of push Eversource to be a little bit more innovative or forward thinking or whatever. And I mean, Eversource is also in Massachusetts and Connecticut, so I don't know if there's anything we could do to follow their leads. Um, other Paul has said, we don't have the political climate in New Hampshire right now. That may change maybe in November, but let's think about what can we as citizens do? How can we put pressure on our utilities to say, hey, step up, utility, work with us here, make it easier.
I would like to see a coalition of, in this case, Eversource users who are willing to work with me or someone to push back and express discontent with the service we're getting. The excuse that the smart meter is too expensive to deploy is ridiculous. It's ridiculous. They're going to save so much money and make so much money from being able to charge the right price for power at the right time instead of giving a flat rate that is sometimes too low and most times too high. It's just ridiculous.
And Paul, the smart meter programs are enormously capital intensive, so legitimately people tend to do it every 20 or 25 years. Like Massachusetts, we're just getting level 2 smart meters. We haven't had time of use rates in Massachusetts ever because they're so far behind. So there is it's something like $2,000 or $3,000 a meter to install smart meters.
I
it's
don't
insane.
believe that they wouldn't see gains from the deployment of smart meter. I think it's a red herring. I think they lay it on the tracks in front of the legislators so the legislators won't do anything so they can go get their 11% doing a power line upgrade
Yeah, I
somewhere that doesn't need
100%
it.
agree with you, but in general, regulators are really skeptical of smart meter rollout programs. They're very capital intensive, unfortunately. It's stupid. They're not very complicated, but that's the reality.
Go ahead, Clifton.
It's true if they were going to convert all their meters, in one program, that is a big capital expense, in part because they want to build their own dedicated mesh network, communication network, which is sort of the a standard. However, their own provider, Itron, also offers a solution for incremental new investment in metering with a fairly low cost to set it up and do it. We investigated this with Liberty when they had to do more granular metering for their battery pilot, but not to convert their whole system. And the fact is, we have been trying to engage Eversource in pointing out that the actual cost for the meter is not that much more. It's on the order of less than $100 per meter. It ends up a lot more because of the way they calculate attributing overhead to that cost.
Yeah, and also they install the truck rolls and all, the whole thing, right? So,
right. But the fact of the matter is, it can be done incrementally at much lower cost. Even to come out and have a meter swapped, it's not thousands of dollars for a truck roll. It's like $70 in Liberty's tariff for a truck roll to swap out a meter such as
it's the cost of the smart meters, the software to support the software, the implementation plan, all that stuff.
The point is, Itron, we investigated this. Itron has a solution for small munis that are incrementally implementing smart metering, where you pay on a subscription basis for cloud based, and the whole setup cost for one municipality that they gave us as an example that had published the numbers was a couple $100,000.
That's great.
And then a per meter cost for the cloud-based meter data management and collection system.
And do they use Wi-Fi in the house to?
They use existing cellular.
Yeah.
Okay. We got revenue grade metering for streetlights for $700 or $800. And the cost to sign up for 10 years of data collection through AT&T was on the order of $1 or $2 per light per year, all paid up front in a simple it was like a one-time cost of $120 for the whole data control device for the streetlights.
Yeah, got it. Cool.
And we get interval meter streams to the city and Liberty Utilities for every hour, all the time, using cellular data. And it just was not that expensive to use existing secure cellular
Yeah,
data
cool.
systems.
Yeah,
But
great. That's awesome.
but the point
Yeah.
the point is they're not even sort of really willing to seriously discuss it. And because even though the commission called for them to plan on putting in AMI back more than almost 20 years ago at this point, they have prioritized Massachusetts and Connecticut, and they keep saying, well, New Hampshire will get to New Hampshire someday, maybe 10 years in the future. And
Sure.
that has just got to give and change because this can be done incrementally if those who want to make use of the technology are willing to pay for those costs.
And
I
those
will.
of us, Brad, who are willing, would be willing to supplement it. I mean, I'll bear $300 cost, $400 cost for
Yeah,
one.
I'm
They've
with you.
never considered that because I know that if I have it, I'm going to be able to schedule my battery like yours and my solar or whatever, my heat pump, to be cooperative with the web. Good for them, good for us, lower transmission costs. You know this story. I mean, this is just ridiculous.
Yeah, a lot of this has to do with really political will.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think there's two things. There's political will, and there's also Eversource. My experience with trying to get any large capital projects done, which we sold them lots of software, they're terrible at doing implementation, right? So this has to become a higher priority for the utility, which generally means the regulators tell them to do it, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. The regulators, you have to have somebody in a policy position who sees this as a priority. And
Correct.
then what they do is they go through and they identify all the bottlenecks, what's preventing things from happening, how realistic is to, make that a priority now or later. But the objective becomes to solve the problem. And right now, the problem is it's like they're asleep. They just don't see what happens when these 1.6 gigawatt AI data centers start to appear. And that's the problem. The political will, then from the political will, you can start to get the regulatory system to function. And then I think the utilities have to get into line. Otherwise, they're going to be penalized. You can penalize them as well. They get penalized right now if they work into their reserve. They have to pay a dollar or more kilowatt when they're getting into their reserve margin. And you know why that happened? That was because of the blackouts in the what was it, the 1960s and 70s when the whole New England Northeast grid went out. Well, can't have that happening all the time. And so the point here is that there's a lot of room for us to have an impact on the political situation. If we simply focus on, like the technical details, which you're all adept at, okay, then you're going to get into this engineer says this, that engineer says that, and the public goes to sleep. You have to deal with it at the level of do you want to pay twice as much for your electricity when one of these data centers shows up? And by the way, what is your representative in the legislature doing about it? Oh, they want to make it easier for data mining to happen in New Hampshire, but they haven't thought about where the supply of energy is going to come from. Oh, they tell you that they're going to get it from small modular reactors. Oh, wait a minute. Those aren't going to be available for 10 years. So where are they going to get the energy? They're not. They're going to just take your energy and make you pay more for energy in competition with them. I mean, these are really basic concepts. And we're going to have to talk to ordinary people about their utility bill and what Eversource is doing to screw them, which is what they're doing right now. And
Would you like to retitle your talk, Paul? Would you like to retitle your talk? Whatever source is doing?
Eversource screws the repair part 1, 2, and the sequel. No, look,
All right, folks. It's almost
it's
quarter past. We've gone well over, and I'm sure we could continue discussing this for quite a while. First, I want to remind all the co-op people to vote. If you're eligible to vote, please vote. Contact Paul Bemis if you want to talk about ideas of how maybe public could put pressure on Eversource to get into this new century. And I will share Paul's slides and the recording in a little bit. Thank you all very much. Very interesting meeting today. Take care. Bye-bye, everybody.